Alright, so this is not a tutorial, but it's an overview of kind of all the elements in here and really quickly how I created them. So if we just look at our level here, this is your basic third-person player project template. Create a folder called NPC AI Patrol Points. In here, I created a NPC character actor just by right-clicking, blueprint class, going to character, renaming it, of course, opening that character, selected the character mesh, and selected the third-person skeleton, dropped it down, rotated it 90, set the animation blueprint to third person. All of that was basically irrelevant for my particular use case because I'm going to actually have a little floaty character. So ultimately I'm going to be ending up hiding this third person or the skeletal mesh using hidden in game to actually hide the mesh. But for testing it out, it was useful obviously to have just like a character that I could see very clearly. Then I added I think, what did I do? Select capsule component. I added a spring arm, and as a child of that spring arm, added a cube. And then I shrunk that cube down. Did I do that? Yeah, shrunk it down to 0.1 or something like that, or 0.2. Yeah, something like that. On the spring arm, I set the target arm length to 0, and then did an offset to go above the character. So if it was close to our actual character, it's going to be above and not like right in her face, you know, something like that. And then also enabled lag on the spring arm. Enable camera lag, enable camera rotation lag, and set the lag down to like 1. So that means like when the character is moving, this will just lag behind, the cube will lag behind all of these movements, and be nice and sort of floaty. Not fully floaty, but just laggy. We also end up adding additional floaty behavior in the event graph. So that's I think that's mostly. Oh, there was one other thing with the character movement relating to rotation. We use controller orient rotation to movement. I think we enabled, and then also under oh, you can set your max walk speed. You can increase this higher or lower. I think we actually end up making a variable for that as well later. I think that's it. Might have been on the capsule component. Yeah, I think that's all I did in this, like to like the actual third-person character. And then we end up adding a bunch of variables, and then all the logic goes in the event graph. So I just wanted to show how I set up that NPC character, and how I named it. Would have named it NPC. And I could just double check if we open up mine. Yeah, spring arm cube. So the spring arm. Oh, the spring arm was a child of the mesh. Was the only other difference there. So this was like that kind of setup. Yeah. Yeah, that looks about right. Yeah, so that's all I did for just like the actual character setup. Close that new blueprint, so we don't actually need this. I was just showing how we set it up. Also created a material and made it pink so that I could very clearly see a difference between myself and the NPC. And then we got these box triggers in here. So this is a really simple actor blueprint. So this was created just by right-clicking, blueprint class, created an actor, and then I duplicated it a bunch of times. Well, I set up the logic and then duplicated it first. So created the one actor, added a box trigger, box trigger. Wait, what is it? Yeah, box collision. Sorry, add a box collision. And that's basically it. Has a event actor begin overlap, and then I'm casting to the NPC blueprint. So whatever you've named your NPC. So here in my case it's AI underscore moving BP. Like that's what I'm casting to. And then as that cast, I am setting a Boolean condition so that when the NPC overlaps with the box collision, it sets a condition that I've made in my NPC that says it has reached its target index, and I set it to true. So the default value of this is going to be false, but once the NPC collides with the box trigger, then it gets set to true. So the default is false, and then once it collides, it gets set to true. But yeah, you'll need to add this after you obviously create your NPC and create this variable. But that's how the box triggers are set up, and they've been added to the level. So I again just duplicated the box triggers and then added them to the level wherever I wanted. In addition to the box triggers, you also have to add targets. So in place actors, you add a target point. So however many box triggers or targets I want, I add those to the level. And there's probably a way to like connect the box actor to the target, or rather, you know, actually add the target. Do it in here. I don't know. Can't add it as a component, but there's probably a way to like tie those things together, so it's like you're just dealing with one target that also is the collision. But I'm just doing it manually, so two separate items. The target point is separate from the box collision, and I've manually placed them like on top of each other. So you can see here, this is like the little target, and I've just placed in my box collision. So as the AI is running towards this target, it enters the box collision. Also have a test sequence, so level sequence, and once my NPC character was added to my world outliner, my level, I add this actor to track, and then added a transform track, and just did a little crappy animation, just to like so it could be very clear that my sequence is being run, triggered at some point. And so that's our NPC setup. We got our box triggers. We talked about the targets. We got the material and the sequence. So that all looks good. Wasn't really anything I did in project settings. So that's the basic setup, and then everything else with regard to the logic happens in the NPC event graph. So before I go over that stuff, let's just actually see what actually happens. So we start, and the NPC starts to run. We see this waited and no longer waiting. Print, check, and then as I approach of a certain distance, then it goes to target 1, and then it advances to target 2. So I can just keep following it. Goes to target 2. Now it's going to go to target 3 over here, and it's going to go to target 4, and then it triggers the sequence. And then after the sequence, it gets destroyed. Cool. So that's the basic setup. So I think it's going to be flexible enough for what I need, because I'm going to be able to move my targets around, these box collisions, and potentially destroy the actor. I haven't tried spawning it and to see if it all repeats the logic or moves on to the different boxes. I'd probably just actually create, just for simplicity, a new NPC that gets spawned at a certain point by me, the player, like if I was on a different like area of the level and I needed to do this again. But let's look at the logic that we have. So I'm gonna go into our NPC here. So we got a bunch of variables and a component. So everything happens in event tick, and I'm gonna be terrible at explaining this, but this is like, if the player is too far away, then wait, right? So we get the player location, which is me as the third person player, and we get the distance to self, which is this actor, which is the NPC. And if that distance is less than 800, then it's false. wait, if it's less than 800, then it waits. Yeah, so it would be false. So then, no, sorry. Greater than 800, then it waits. So yeah, so then here's my actor. Yeah, so then if waiting, then look at the player. Yeah, so it just waits, right? And then in addition to that, I had it look at the player so that like it turns around. This was more relevant when it was like a third-person character, but it still does rotate the little floaty companion cube. So I'm keeping this logic, but it's basically getting the actor location from the player and then getting the cube actor or the NPC actor. Finding a lookout rotation and setting a relative rotation. And you can play some animation if you want, or add a delay, and then I have my print strings. None of this is really relevant to my little companion cube, but yeah, there it is anyways. If we are close to the character, then we continue our follow stuff. So we got this branch where we continue, and then since we have those target points, oh, and the last thing I didn't show up was on your NPC. Once you add all your target points, you select your NPC, and like if you create this patrol points array variable, which you do need to create this thing, create this variable, you set it to public, and then that's where we have a bunch of elements, so we can add as many elements as we want to hold into the array. And once you compile that, then on your NPC character, if you scroll down, you get these patrol points, and this is where I can select my targets. So this is how you get the reference of these target points that we've added from place actors, and how we can actually see them in our NPC blueprint. And those patrol points, any of those IDs, 0 through 3 in my case, can be set as this integer target of where to go. So I think that's what this logic is doing. I don't fully understand it. This is from a tutorial, but it's like getting the ID, setting it to that integer, I think comparing it or normalizing it, and then comparing it, this equal to equal thing. So if you're, I think part of this logic might have been also related to randomization. The tutorial was showing me how to randomly jump between the different targets, but I don't know. Yeah, whatever. Anyways, anim. So this is probably not even needed by our like if we're doing this companion cube thing, because this is like, I think you do need the wait stuff, but you don't need this play animation stuff. And this is a delay that's just like provides a delay that's like within an integer range. So it's not like waiting for the precise same duration every single time. There's a bit of variation, I guess. And then if it's reached the patrol, oh yeah, so this is all the logic. These chunks here is like the sequenced logic of going from box to box, or target to target. So here, so if your NPC has reached patrol point ID 0, which is our first trigger box, if it has not reached it, so if the condition, this has reached target 0, is false, then it just continues to try and reach target 0. But if the NPC goes into the trigger box, based on that trigger box logic, we set the condition to true. And if it's true, then you can move on to your next target, right? And then that makes sure there's an animation thing that is again irrelevant for our little companion cube, but then it waits and then it goes on to the next ID. And this just repeats, right? I'm just going up one index, 1, 2, 2, 3, and then 3, the last one. So it just goes sequentially all the way through each of the trigger boxes. And at the end, if it's successful, we create a level sequence. We play the level sequence. We bind an event to onStop for the level sequence so that the level sequence has time to play. And then once it's stopped, it sets a custom event to destroy both the level sequence and also this NPC target actor. And that's basically the setup. The only other bit of extra logic here is this like floaty companion behavior, which on event begin play, we're going to get the cube and set the cube's relative location using this up-down timeline, which is from 0 to 0.75 to 0. And this like loops back and forth. And we multiply the values here by 30 and add it to the relative z. And that's what gives us this like floaty up and down behavior. That we can see how it's like kind of hovering up and down a little bit. So we can change those values to increase that, you know, maybe modify that blueprint chunk if we wanted some rotational behavior or, position behavior in the X and Y. But yeah, that's basically the setup. I think that's everything for the AI. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm not doing this very like organized, like in a very organized way. Originally, I thought there was a way where you could do it where this where to go was like incrementing the integer. So like doing a check on what integer it is at and then adding 1. So like then you would have, then I think you could avoid like having to duplicate all this, but I don't understand that stuff as much. So doing it kind of this like more straightforward way, and I guess this is kind of messy because there's probably some stuff in here I don't need, and I don't need any of the character animation stuff for this like floaty cube business, but I guess as is with the proper animations, if you did have a character, then you would want to play whatever animation, you know, as it stops, you want to play your idle animation. As it runs, you want to make sure that's working properly, which in this current example, it doesn't really work perfectly, but you know, what I would do is go to my mesh and set it to hidden in game and compile and save, and then now I'm just like have my floaty little AI character that I can follow around, and its behavior is actually not too bad because it kind of like sits and waits for you at a certain distance, and then if you catch up, it like kind of moves a little bit faster, which is good. And then it reaches its end, and then it plays the level sequence. So cool. Oh yeah, the only other weird thing is that I've tested this a whole bunch. It seems to work fine. There was only a couple instances where it kind of like broke, and I think it was because you can force it off track because it has a collision, like the collision capsule has collisions, so you can mess with it in a way sometimes. And I think I did that by accident, and it kind of got messed up a little bit. See, like this kind of thing, you can mess it up, but it still works. There was a scenario where it like went to trigger box 2 and then it just stayed there forever, so I'm not sure what happened in that scenario, but I think for the most part it should be fine, but just to be aware. And the collision stuff, I don't really know how to fix that. I did go into the mesh and let's change this back to hidden game. Go to the collisions, and I set no collisions. So the mesh doesn't have any collision. The cube has no collision. Maybe it's that. But the capsule component has collisions, and you need to have collisions, because if you set this to none, then it like falls to the ground. So yeah, I don't know how you can do that, so you can't mess with the character, but yeah, it might not even be a big deal if you're like just kind of, if it's going to be invisible anyway. So yeah, there we go.